How you doing, guys? We are back with another Game of Thrones video. This time, we have a fairly controversial discussion. Before we get into it, there are a few things you should do. Like, subscribe, and check out my other channel. The link will be in the description. Okay, this is one of, if not the most, controversial subjects I've discussed on this channel. Many fans have argued about this, and even more fans argued about it while the show was still coming out. The ones who still argue about it are probably people who go by the books and are still waiting for them to be finished. In this video, I will discuss both the books and the show, as both lack in information about certain aspects of Robert's rebellion. I'll also be using some theories that are heavily implied but not confirmed. A lot of information about Robert's rebellion is vague, and there isn't much info about it, and some of it contradicts itself, so forgive me if some of the information in this video is confusing or incorrect. If this video is too long for you, then skip to this timestamp. This is where I summarize the points I've made without the evidence backing them up, which is earlier in the video. So first, we'll go over each controversial thing about Rhaegar. First, the biggest one is his relationship with Lyanna. They do have a bit of an age gap. Rhaegar is 23 or 24, and Lyanna is 16 or 17. Many sources differ, but each one had Rhaegar at about 23 or 24 when he died, and Lyanna at 16 or 17 when she died. So, that is a 6 to 8 year age gap, which isn't good by any means. But in both the books and the show, there are far bigger age gaps which aren't even looked at twice by many characters and some fans. Robert was a bit older than Rhaegar, and Ned, as well as everybody else, thought Robert's betrothal to Lyanna was fine. Obviously, in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, there are many big age gaps in couples, but by comparing this one to, say, Jon Arryn and Lysa Tully, or the one between Walder Frey and his 50 wives, or even Khal Drogo and Daenerys, you begin to realize it wouldn't be very notable in A Song of Ice and Fire. Long story short, in our world, we all agree it's very bad, but in their world, they see it as normal. So, moving forward in the show, it's an open and shut case. Rhaegar didn't harm Lyanna in any way. However, in the books, it's slightly more debatable. He almost certainly didn't kidnap her or anything. In both the books and the show, she showed signs of being attracted to him before even meeting him. The big sign was the way she looked at him and cried when he played his harp during the tourney at Harrenhal, and the way she poured a glass of wine on Benjen when Benjen pointed it out. After this, the Knight of the Laughing Tree fought in the tourney, and per usual, the Mad King went nuts. In the book, he had many people look for the mysterious knight, including Rhaegar Targaryen, who led the search. In the show, however, it might have been Robert Baratheon who was the one who searched for the knight. But it could have been Rhaegar too, because the source is a little iffy, and Rhaegar makes much more sense. Even if Robert was the one who was sent, nobody would have stopped Rhaegar from searching for the knight. The Knight of the Laughing Tree is Lyanna in both the books and the show. And in the books, all the evidence points towards her. When Rhaegar went to look for her, it's pretty likely that he found her, and he probably would have talked with her once he did. And this would have been their first time meeting each other. It's also fairly likely that when Rhaegar crowned Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, it was because of her defense of Howland Reed, as he couldn't publicly acknowledge what she did, but he could acknowledge her by doing this. Regardless of his intentions, this was not very smart. I think he did it with the best intentions, but still, he shouldn't have done this. He almost certainly didn't kidnap her. If you read between the lines, you can figure out it was most likely a lie told by Littlefinger. Long story short, Brandon was probably coming after Littlefinger to give him an ass whipping. Littlefinger and Lyanna were most likely staying in the same place when she went with Rhaegar, so he probably saw her leave with him. So when Brandon found him, Littlefinger probably told him Rhaegar abducted Lyanna. So 1, Brandon wouldn't kill him, and 2, Brandon would most likely die by pursuing Rhaegar, as he had 2 Kingsguard with him. I got this theory from Indie Geek, who's goated, who made a whole video on it, which you should watch. The link will be in the description. This theory can be applied to both the books and the show, but the books have more info to go off of. Also, there's another theory with less evidence, but still possible, saying that Lyanna begged Rhaegar to go with him, so she wouldn't have to marry Robert. While this theory makes a lot of sense, it lacks evidence. Long story short, Rhaegar probably knew Lyanna before getting with her, and he didn't kidnap her. This was most likely what they thought to be a win-win scenario. Lyanna wanted to be with Rhaegar, and if she was, this meant she wouldn't have to be with Robert, who she didn't like. And for Rhaegar, he could be with Lyanna, who he probably wanted to be with, and he could have another kid what she wanted and thought he needed to fulfill a prophecy. Also, Rhaegar was described as the best looking man in the Seven Kingdoms. He was also noble, kind, and a cunning warrior. It's pretty unlikely he'd need to kidnap her. The next controversial thing about Rhaegar some people could bring up is that he didn't do much about his father. The Mad King became mad when Rhaegar was just a kid, and his father's peak madness began when he was just a teen. The Mad King killed people who he suspected of opposing him. He despised many and was just crazy and unpredictable. Rhaegar was never close with his father. Aerys thought Rhaegar wanted to overthrow him. Aerys also insulted Rhaegar's child and wife. He didn't allow him to see his own little brother at all almost. Aerys also abused Rhaegar's mother. So I think it's safe to say Rhaegar didn't like him very much. Their relationship was very rough, but I don't know if I would say Rhaegar feared him. He obviously wouldn't openly oppose him, but he would do other things. The tourney at Harrenhal was most likely arranged by Rhaegar. Once again, you can watch a video on it going very in depth. I can link one in the description, but he most likely wanted to get the Lords of Westeros in one place. He meant to do this because he wanted to call a great council to discuss his father's madness. Basically, he wanted to get the Lords of the Realms to back him to be king, so Aerys could be booted out of power. Varys figured it out, and the Mad King went to Harrenhal. This is why the council didn't happen. Before he leaves for the Battle of the Trident, he tells Barristan Selmy that he would make changes in court when he returned. This is in the show. He said something similar to Jaime before he left as well, and he also said he meant to do it long ago in the books. What these instances show is that Rhaegar knew his father was a problem, and he wanted to do something about it. But Rhaegar was smart, and he knew if he took violent action, people would get hurt, and people would get hurt if his father found out about his plans. Keep in mind, Rhaegar was considered by most to be peaceful, so he wouldn't start a civil war against his father if there was another way. You can say that he still didn't do anything against his father, but overthrowing monarchs isn't a simple task, especially when this particular monarch is known for causing violence. Now onto the one that's probably the most open to interpretation, his relationship with Elia Martell and his kids. First, let's discuss Elia. We barely know anything about their relationship, but it's worth keeping in mind she was raised in Dorne and was second in line to their throne. She was likely taught about politics and learned to be strong, as most Martells did. Physically, she was pretty frail because she was born prematurely. That doesn't mean that she was emotionally or mentally frail. She was fairly smart, and seeing as she was Dornish, she was spiritually strong as well. Most likely. Barristan in the books said Rhaegar was fond of Elia, and that they got along well, but never said he loved her. Oberyn has said that Elia loved Rhaegar, but Oberyn didn't spend much time with her after her marriage, as they now lived far from each other. And he also thought of Elia as a victim to Rhaegar, who he hated, so it might not be the most accurate telling of events. Regardless, they probably were at least okay with one another. When Rhaegar crowned Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, we never hear about her reaction, immediate or otherwise, which most likely means she didn't have much of a reaction. He spent much time with her. He even waited 6 months for her health to return before presenting their child before his father, just so she could accompany him safely. In the vision Daenerys has of them, they don't really seem to be very happy, but this is most likely because Elia is extremely weakened from her childbirth, and Rhaegar is probably deep in thought because he believes he needs one more kid, which his wife can't give him. Now Rhaegar is a Targaryen. Many Targaryens have practiced polygamy, and Rhaegar, who knows much of history, would have lived his life knowing this. So polygamy wouldn't be anything crazy to him. Targaryen bastards also were treated well. One became Hand of the King, one was given Dark Sister, a Valyrian steel sword. Elia is sister to Oberyn Martell, and has been with many women, who has had many bastard children. And he's been with many women. He's a father to his bastards and treats them well. Elia and Oberyn were very close to each other, so it's likely she shared these beliefs as well. So Rhaegar needed one more kid, which Elia couldn't give him. Elia was fine with polygamy, so was Rhaegar, who was also noble and honest, so it's fairly likely he got her consent before he went off with Lyanna. This is going by the books mostly, but this is also probably true in the show. Now in the show, Rhaegar and Elia's marriage is annulled. In the books, I don't think it will be. So in the show, he ended his previous marriage so he can marry Lyanna, who he loves. And in the books, he will either stay married to Elia and marry Lyanna as well, or he'll annul his marriage to Elia. And in the show and in the books, Rhaegar has 2 legitimate children with Elia, so they did do their duty. We don't really know much of his relationship with his kids, but he was on Dragonstone for a considerable amount of time with his family, so he most likely cared for them. He was known to be caring. Now, let's discuss what he did to protect his wife and kids. When Rhaegar left his family, they were in Dragonstone, which was a fairly safe place, but they didn't have any Kingsguard with them. Rhaegar didn't have full control over the Kingsguard. His father did. I'm sure he had some household guards or Targaryen soldiers on Dragonstone. There must have at least been a few dozen men, if not hundreds. Rhaegar had 2 Kingsguard protecting Lyanna, most likely to keep his child safe, and to keep her safe, and probably to keep them hidden as well. While Rhaegar was with Lyanna, his family was moved to King's Landing by the Mad King to ensure Dorne would stay loyal to him. This is something Rhaegar couldn't do a thing about without opposing his murderous father who hated him. Rhaegar thought he would win the battle. You can figure this out when he says to Jaime and Barristan how he will change things when he comes back. This is in the books and the show. He was certain he would win. He really didn't think they would lose. They had 5,000 more soldiers, all of whom were fresh. They had the heir to the Iron Throne leading them. And by his side was possibly the greatest knight there ever was, Barristan Selmy. So, in his mind, there was no need to protect his family, because there was no way he would lose. And he did have Jaime Lannister in the Red Keep to protect his family. The Kingsguard was extremely spread out, and not entirely his to control. His father basically kept his family as hostages. So there wasn't much he could do to change that, besides winning the battle, which he was sure he would do, as were his followers. So the safety of his kids was largely out of his hands, and he thought they would be safe. So it's not that he didn't care for them. Also, Rhaegar likely thought since his son was the rightful heir, his father or mother would try to get his son, Aegon, and the rest of his family to safety. He was arrogant before the battle, I'll admit that, but it wasn't due to his ego. It was rather humble, I'd say, but because he strongly believed in prophecy. Now, let's discuss his character attributes. Rhaegar is one of the best fighters in the Seven Kingdoms, if not the best. Barristan, Viserys, Jorah, and others talked about how good of a swordsman he really was. He was regarded as one of the best fighters in the kingdoms by most, especially after he won the greatest tourney there ever was. Some could say that Barristan or Dane went easy on him, but nobody watching said anything like that, so I don't think they did. And if they did, they most likely didn't hold back much. In the tourney, Rhaegar was the last man standing. Barristan Selmy, Arthur Dayne, among the other greatest knights of the kingdoms. All were defeated in this tournament. So, he was a good fighter, but he never liked to fight. He only fought in this one tourney, and he did it to peacefully overthrow a ruthless monarch. Rhaegar was extremely peaceful and was never described as violent by anyone who knew him. He had strong morals, as pointed out by Jorah Mormont, Barristan Selmy, and even others who weren't fond of him, like Oberyn or Littlefinger, acknowledged how noble everyone thought he was. He was caring. He sang to the common people of King's Landing. One time, he gave the money he earned to an orphanage, and another time, he gave it to another singer. These are good deeds that nobody at court saw. This didn't really benefit him much, and Barristan always thought of Rhaegar as a good man. So I think it's fair to say those acts were genuine. He was also loved for his good looks, as many described him, to be one of the best looking men in Westeros. He was also a great singer, and he played the harp well. Barristan thought Rhaegar was melancholy, and had a sense of doom to him. Many people said not much made Rhaegar happy, and that nobody truly knew him. I think the melancholy of Rhaegar can be figured out easily. His father was a murderous lunatic who feared Rhaegar. His father abused and harassed his mother, and he wasn't allowed to see his brother. His father slowly tore apart the Seven Kingdoms, and people looked to him to fix that. He knew he needed to stop the Mad King, but it was his own father he needed to stop, and the Mad King wouldn't go down without a fight. His birth was shortly after the death of many Targaryens as well. I think he had good reason to be sad. It's possible he was depressed. Maybe in the books, but probably not in the show. I think the reason nobody knew him and he never seemed happy is probably because he was very stoic. People talked about how he would think alone often. I think this is because he was introverted by nature, which isn't a bad thing, by any means. I believe him not reacting in any big ways and not showing emotion often was him being stoic. I think with a crazy father who could snap at any time, stoicism was a trait he needed to learn. Rhaegar was extremely disciplined and was devoted to whatever he put his mind to. He was very dutiful as well. He was extremely intelligent and knowledgeable. Maesters were awed by him. Some people even joked his mother must have swallowed books when he was in her womb. He must have been a good leader. As Barristan says, he lifted the spirit of his troops, and when Rhaegar died, his forces were broken and scattered. Now let's talk about his belief in prophecy. His belief in prophecy is what caused his confidence in everything he believed in. It also could have added to his melancholy nature and stoicism, because the second long night wasn't anything to look forward to, and he didn't tell many about his belief in prophecy. The main prophecy he believed in was the one about the prince who was promised. He knew the prince that was promised was also Azor Ahai. He discussed this with Maester Aemon through letters over time. Rhaegar eventually believed his son would be the prince that was promised, and he was right, kind of. I'm not sure which son he thought it would be, Aegon, his second oldest kid, or Jon, but he thought it would be one of them. It's possible he thought he needed another kid to fulfill the prophecy because the dragon has 3 heads, so he needed 3 Targaryen children, or he thought his third child would be the prince that was promised. This would explain why he sought after Lyanna, because she had Stark blood, which is the blood of the first men, which has potential for magic in it, and he's a Targaryen who had Valyrian blood, which also had the potential for magic. This would result in a son who had immense magic potential, so he would have a big chance of being the prince who was promised. This is a lot of speculation, but there's good reasoning behind it. Many of the big actions he makes are because of prophecy. It's possible he expected Elia wasn't going to be able to have a third child during her second pregnancy because of her poor health and her slow recovery from her first pregnancy. So this could be another reason why he crowned Lyanna as the Queen of Love and Beauty. He knew he would need another kid, and she was the best candidate. He also needed to show the realm that he wasn't disrespecting her or anything, but that he appreciated her for her beauty and her bravery, and this could have been what he thought was the best way to do it. So let's sum all of this up. This is for the people who don't want to watch the whole video. First, Rhaegar organized a tourney at Harrenhal to call a great council to remove the Mad King from power. Rhaegar found out Lyanna was the Knight of the Laughing Tree. He likely figured it out. She entered the tourney to defend Howland Reed. He also likely confronted her and talked to her. Rhaegar and Lyanna do have a 6 to 8 year age gap, but that's not nearly as bad as other characters in this series. He then won the tourney and crowned her the Queen of Love and Beauty. He did this either to appreciate her bravery, to appreciate her beauty, or he did it because he knew she would be the best option for his third kid, and he could have figured out Elia might not have the ability to birth another child after their second. He probably chose Lyanna partly because of his belief in prophecy, or it could have been some combination of those 3 reasons. I believe it was a combination of all 3. Elia had no big reaction to this, and he stayed with her and their children after this for a few months. He likely came to an agreement with Elia about him pursuing Lyanna because she couldn't have another kid and he wanted another. They also both were likely used to the idea of polygamy, and both didn't see bastards as a bad thing. They produced 2 children together, thus fulfilling their duty. So it's possible she was fine with their marriage being annulled, and she wasn't bothered by him marrying again. He then went to find Lyanna, who's probably keeping in touch with her since the tourney at Harrenhal. He gets there with 2 Kingsguard, 3 in the books. He and Lyanna go to Dorne, to a secluded tower. She possibly begged him to go, but he definitely didn't kidnap her. Littlefinger is a second away from an ass whooping by Brandon Stark and lies, saying Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna. Robert's Rebellion begins soon after. Brandon and Rickard Stark are killed by the Mad King. Rhaegar gives Lyanna the work for basically the whole year. He gets his marriage to Elia annulled, and he marries Lyanna. He might have thought his third son was the prince who was promised, or he might have just thought he needed a third son to fulfill the prophecy. We don't know, but he most likely thought it would be his third child. Rhaegar comes to King's Landing after his father sends men to search for him. Rhaegar raises an army to fight Robert in the final battle of the war. Rhaegar planned to replace his father on the Iron Throne. Upon his return, Rhaegar dies. Then his kids and Elia were killed during the sack of King's Landing. The reason his family's lives were out of his hands is because Rhaegar only had partial control of the Kingsguard, who were scattered everywhere, and his father moved his family to King's Landing, which was more dangerous than Dragonstone, and he couldn't stop this. He was 100% sure he would win the battle, so he didn't fear what would happen if he lost. Also, his son was the rightful heir, so logically, he and his family would be protected by the Mad King. This obviously didn't happen. Rhaegar was a cunning warrior, he was the best looking man in Westeros, and he was a good friend. He was also a good singer, and he played the harp very well. He was very intelligent and knowledgeable. He was also very thoughtful. He was very benevolent and cared for the common people. He was very kind and caring. He was also empathetic. He was very stoic and introverted. He was extremely dutiful and honorable and noble. He believed in prophecies strongly. and he was extremely devoted to them. He was very melancholy because of parts of his life that he couldn't control. He was loved by all, and those who knew him still loved him after lies spread about him. So, let's put all this together. Was Rhaegar a good person, or a bad person, or in between? You have to take into account the world he lives in, because many things we find horrible are fine for them, like huge age gaps with couples, including teens. So, taking this into account, in his world, I think he is a good person. He probably should have explained his actions and told the world he didn't abduct Lyanna. But by the time he found out about it, it was already too late, because by then, Brandon Stark was already arrested, and Rickard was called down to King's Landing. He also probably shouldn't have named Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty. He had good intentions, but it was a bad choice. But even with these bad choices, the good far outweighs the bad. As Barristan said, he was the finest man he ever knew. Every single person who knew him thought he was a good person. I don't think that's a coincidence. By the standard of our world, he probably is on the lower end of the morality spectrum, solely because of his relationship with Lyanna. So, in our world, I think he probably would be a bad person, but almost every character in Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire would be considered a bad person by our standards today. Maybe 5 aren't. Rhaegar is meant to be like a Prince Charming figure almost. He was like the perfect man. He was a good fighter, he was good looking, he was loved by all, he was introverted, he was stoic, he had a sad demeanor, and he did what he thought needed to be done, making him another just like me Sigma male. Nah, just kidding. If it wasn't for his relationship with Lyanna, he would be. But if there was a Robert Rebellion show, then I bet she'll be aged up. I really do want a Robert's Rebellion prequel. It would be fire. One character who I would compare to Rhaegar is Jon Snow in the show. Both are good fighters. Both are kind and benevolent. Both keep their thoughts and emotions to themselves. Both don't like what they're good at. For Jon, it's leading and fighting. And for Rhaegar, it's fighting and maybe leading. Both have a strong sense of duty, and both are very stoic. Both were leaders who were chosen. Obviously, Rhaegar was the heir to the Iron Throne, but the people loved him, and it wasn't just because he was the heir. I think Rhaegar is like Jon if he grew up as a Targaryen rather than a Stark. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's rather long-winded, I know, but it's an interesting topic, and I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, and I've been watching so many Robert's Rebellion lore videos. So, I had to make this. If you want more videos like this, analyzing if characters are good or bad people, please comment down below. Maybe I'll make one on Robert Baratheon or Jaime Lannister next. I'll see you guys later. Have a good day. Bye. There are many there are many to appreciate her